The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author, and we are coming up on the 10th anniversary of FloridaBeerBlog.com. In that time, I have seen a lot of Florida breweries open up. I've seen a number of Florida breweries close, unfortunately. And some have stayed the course. There are a number of beers that were around back then that are still around today. One of those is Orange Blossom Pilsner, and that is sort of the linchpin of Orange Blossom Brewing Company. They are based in Orlando for as long as I've known. When I first found out about them, they were being brewed and released in glass bottles, brewed out of Thomas Creek in North Carolina. They are back here in Florida in cans coming out of BrewHub in Lakeland. They've had some beers come and some beers go from the portfolio, but it's always been there, always been a brewery and a name that I can count on staying the course. This is all the brainchild of Tom Moench. He is a brewer that is based in Orlando, and it was his brainchild to create not only Orange Blossom Brewing Company and Orange Blossom Pilsner, but their two additional sort of sister releases, I guess you would say, OBP Squared, which is a blast, and City Beautiful IPA. And we're going to sit down to talk to Tom about what it was like bringing craft beer to Central Florida all those years ago, the ebb and flow of everything coming out of Orange Blossom Brewing Company, my late but beloved toasted coconut porter, and some of the amazingness that is happening with craft beer in Orlando. If you've never tried any of their beers, it is worth a shot. Definitely check them out. You should be able to find them at the more discerning craft beer locations around the state. But for me, I am going to go ahead and crack open an OBP Squared, and we will sit back and listen to Tom regale us with all sorts of fantastic stories about these beers. Tom Moench, Orange Blossom Brewing Company. Enjoy. Orange Blossom Pilsner seems to have been right at the forefront of the main body of the craft beer explosion here in the state of Florida. I remember it being very prominent when I started the blog almost 10 years ago. How long have you been brewing just yourself, Tom, and how long has Orange Blossom Pilsner as an entity been in existence?
Oh my, this is a long answer for you, sir.
Go for it.
Oh, let's see. God, I'm going to go all the way back to when I was 10. My father was going to Colorado, and somehow I knew that Coors was special and we couldn't get it here in the East. So I asked him to bring me back some. Now, later I wondered
10?
if it would. Yeah. So later, that was 1970. And that was before Smokey and the Bandit. So it would seem like Smokey and the Bandit is where that 10-year-old learned about Coors. But no, that was before the movie even came out. So for some reason, I had a devout interest in beer and good beer when I was a kid. And my dad brought me back a 6-pack of 8-ounce Coors, and I treasured it. And then when I was 18, I wasn't old enough to buy beer, but I was old enough to buy the ingredients to make beer. So that is what got me brewing, just a way to jack the system. A little gangster I was. Well, I was never little. And let's see. So I started making my own beer, and by the time I was 30, it was a passion. I wanted to make the best beer in the world, and I well did in my garage. I converted my 2-car garage into a home brewery, went through every beer style one by one until I felt like I not quite mastered it, but was reasonable at reproducing it before I moved on to the next beer style. I also, I invented this little thing called the carbonator that
Interesting.
that I released in. It's a little cap with a quick disconnect fitting on it for a 2-liter bottle. What it was for was to take draft beer out of a keg and carry 2 liters to my friend's house instead of just a keg. And it was a great little draft to go device, and I introduced it at the Craft Brewers Conference in Portland, Oregon in 1994. And that really got me some acclaim. They weren't used to seeing anybody from Florida that had a clue in 1994 at the Craft Brewers Conference. And I won over a lot of friends, made a lot of friends at that point, started working with Hop Union, and just all around beer dork, man.
Nice.
Then,
I was going to say that's a great background. But it's still, I mean, there's so little craft beer in Florida at that time, if there was even any in the mid 90s.
I remember we had this thing called Hub's Pub made a splash, and they would have like 50 tap handles, but they pushed their beer with air, and they were way ahead of their time. The beer tasted awful. They'd have every import that was available in the market. But you'd walk into a Hub's Pub, and 90% of the people sitting there were drinking a macro beer. So they had all that wonderful beer that nobody really cared about yet. So Hub's Pub did not last.
Gotcha.
And it was crazy times back there for a beer lover. I leveraged my little invention into a judging position at the Great American Beer Festival in 1996. I started judging at the GABF. And judged for 23 years before I finally retired because of the hop bombs that damn festival's full of. Just can't take the inundation of hops like I used to.
I was going to say that in 23 years, hops definitely became, it changed from, I guess, a flavoring of the beer to more the focus of the beer. And instead of starting with the malt, people kind of started with the hops and worked their way backwards, what it seems.
Man, I was a hop head, and I loved hops more than anybody, but it's just gotten a little bit too much for me. And I think time has probably taken a toll on my palate, and it just doesn't treat me as well. I'm looking for the finer nuances in a beer rather than just be smacked in the head with flavor.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I'm trying to answer your question, though. What was your question?
Well, the initial question is, so you've been judging at these professional festivals. You've been inundated with great craft beer elsewhere in the United States. What was it that made you decide to throw your hat into the ring and brew your beer for distribution here in Florida?
So my first career was a studio mechanic / stagehand. I worked in the theater and the movie studios out at Universal and MGM. And all the while, I was still a pretty good beer dork, but not really in the business. I had sold off my little carbonator invention, and that wasn't anything any longer. I was working with Hop Union, my friends that I'd made out in Yakima, Washington. I was working with them to spread the word of good hops in the Southeast. But I got a job. There was a little brew pub that opened in '99 in downtown Orlando. And the owners just heard the calculation that you could make beer for $1 a gallon and sell it for $5 a pint. And they loved that math. So they just didn't want to be bothered with all the other things attached to that. It was kind of what happened. They let their dishwasher come in and brew. And of course, the beers were awful. And they knew I was a pretty acclaimed brewer in the area when there weren't very many. And they asked me to come in and clean up. So I did. I came in. Boy, that brewery was a mess. I could just go off on a tangent of how much work I had to get in and how tough it was to get that thing to where I could brew it. And and got the beers cleaned up, got making good beer. Actually took the People's Choice Award at the Universal Beer Festival, 99, 2000 maybe. And I was super proud that the whole crowd, those festivals were nuts back in the day. They were so nuts. They were so nuts that Universal stopped doing them because it was just a madhouse.
I had no idea that they did them.
Oh, good Lord. I went through 7 half barrels in like 4 hours. It was insane. I'd never seen anything like that. But nonetheless, I won the People's Choice Award with my toasted coconut porter. And as I was presenting it to the owners of the brewery in downtown Orlando, they let me know that they were going to close the brewery, that it really wasn't working out like they wanted.
Gotcha.
And I guess it was anger that started my business. I was frustrated that I was trying to help build craft in this desert, and that they just threw it away because they measure their success in the morning for what they put in the cash register last night, and it takes a little more time to build something with beer than that. And so I got frustrated, and I did some research and found out that because if I contract brewed, I could have my own distributor. So I contract brewed my coconut porter and my honey beer, and sold it and started my own little beer distributor. And I had a truck, and I'd go out and sell on Monday, and I'd come in and load the truck up on Tuesday and deliver what I sold. And Wednesday I'd go sell again and do that again until finally I had enough sales to where I could hire a driver, and I didn't have to deliver everything I sold, and then enough sales to hire a salesman. And I had unique beers for about 8 years, and it was hard, man. I was selling half barrels of craft for $1.40 when half barrels of macro beer were 70. And just trying to tell, of course, the red lights and the Jack's Fifth Avenues, they understood, but I couldn't run a business off the few craft centric spots in Central Florida. So I went to try and sell to normal places and found out that I was twice the price of macro beer. And how the hell could I expect that to work? So my best answer was, well, steak costs more than hamburger. And that was my answer for them back then.
Gotcha. I find it interesting because I didn't realize that you had started with both Orange Blossom Pilsner and Toasted Coconut Porter. Why did you kind of, as a brand identity, decide to focus a little bit more on the Orange Blossom Pilsner for both the signature beer that you were releasing and, of course, the name of the company overall?
Well, I had a pretty mad plan in that I wanted to teach people about beer. I knew they were afraid of dark beer. So I had this coconut porter that was dark, but it wasn't big and heavy and intense, and it had a nice little subtle coconut character. So that was my way to kind of suck people into a dark beer. So I would start them with my delicate little honey beer. I learned early on that any macro drinker would enjoy my honey beer when they didn't necessarily enjoy my coconut porter or an IPA. So I brought the OBP in as the training wheel entry-level craft beer. And once you got comfortable drinking that and realized that the world wasn't going to fall apart because you were drinking the macros, then you could look elsewhere. And I wanted to have a dark beer for you to step into. And that was the next step, was a dark beer with a subtle real coconut character to it. And then the next step in that was a strong beer. So I had a 3-step program that I wanted to put people through. Gotcha. And they would start with the honey beer. Wow, that's good. Coconut porter, dark beer, scary. Oh, man, this is good. And what else you got? Oh, I've got this 11% honey beer, big old chewy monster. And so it was my plan in 3 steps to take them from macro beer to the edge. And once they enjoyed my beer and I weaned them off of that crap, then they could just turn and look outward into the rest of the craft beer world. And when I started my company, I wasn't going after craft drinkers. There were none, or very few. I went after macro drinkers. That was who we had to convert. And I worked the I-4 corridor pretty hard doing that. I also learned that I could, along with distributing my own beer, since I was using another brewery's license to manufacture it, I learned that I brought in other beers. Being a judge at the GABF for those years, I made friends with Sam at Dogfish and all the Kings, and I solicited each one of them to bring their beer to Florida. And Sam was awesome. I said, Sam, I've got a beer distributor in Central Florida. I want to carry your beer. He says, send me your fax number and I'll send you a PO or a price sheet, and you can send me a PO. And that's how the fax number. Yeah. What year was that?
Awesome.
Huh? So it was just that easy to get the distribution rights to Dogfish Head in Florida. Things were crazy back then. It was the wild, wild west. And I brought in a lot of other great ones. I brought in Canyon. I brought in the Shelton Brothers portfolio. I brought in Boulder Beer and Avery Beer. And let's see, what else did I bring? I brought a lot of awesome Jolly Pumpkin. Oh, that's a great story. So I'm at the GABF, and I said French Beer de Garde is one of my favorite beer styles, and I saw this weird ass brewery get a gold medal in it, Jolly Pumpkin, with their Oro de Calabaza in Dexter, Michigan, and that just caught my ear. So what do? Monday morning, hello Jolly Pumpkin, congratulations on the medal. You want to distribute in Florida? And Ron Jeffries, the gentleman that he is, he said, well, I don't have any distributors outside of Florida, but I've got family down there, so why not?
It seems to be a very common refrain with a lot of people, like Sun King, who just made it to Sarasota because the owner's got family there.
Yep, that's exactly right. A lot of people, it's pretty brutal up north in January, so people look for a good excuse to do some business down here. And I remember when I had my distributor, I never saw any of my brewery owners or brewery reps in the summer. They all came in the winter. And I didn't blame them one bit.
So let's take a look at the lineup, because you still have, obviously, Orange Blossom Pilsner's not going anywhere. That 11% monster that you mentioned, that's OBP squared. And I remember the first time I had that, which was absolutely fantastic. You are no longer brewing and distributing toasted coconut porter, or at least I have not seen it in a little while. Is that correct?
Yeah, we just weren't able to. The sales weren't pulling through. We're making the smallest batch we can make over at BrewHub is 100 barrels. The quality control is just through the roof, and the liquid is insane over there. But the minimums are pretty high, and that means 100-barrel batch. Theoretically, that means I've got to sell about 60 barrels a month to keep it from going out of code. And we were selling about 30 barrels a month and disposing of about 30 barrels in each batch. And after the fourth time of doing that, we really made an effort to lift the brand and try and get some pull on it, but just couldn't. And we were having such success with our OBP that it just made sense to let that baby go and focus on our nice little honey beer.
Nice. Well, the other thing that you released, and I've got a number of questions based on that, is City Beautiful IPA. City Beautiful, obviously named for Orlando's nickname. And I will start off by asking, here in 2023, how do you view the craft beer scene in and around Orlando? Because it's obviously radically different from when you first started. Do you see it being healthy? Do you see it as being grow out, or is there still basically in its infancy?
It's a toddler for sure. We've got a pretty good core of solid breweries here in town, and we've got some that want to rely more on their artistic nature than their scientific nature, and science comes first and foremost with brewing. And once you get that unlocked, then you can start being artsy fartsy, but the science you can't deny. So that's one thing that I urge brewers. Be creative, but never forget the science, because you got nothing without that.
Awesome. So I guess describe City Beautiful IPA to us. Kind of what was the impetus behind making the recipe and the name, and just what is the recipe? What is the beer? You don't have to give us the recipe.
I'll happily tell you, because I'm a beer dork and I like talking about my beer. So I told you when I was a crazy home brewer in my 30s, I converted my garage to a home brewery and went through every beer style till I felt like I did a pretty good job on it. When I got to American IPA, this is like 94, I knew that American IPA was going to be a big deal. It was going to probably lead. Had no idea how much, but it was going to lead the category. And so I spent some real time dialing in what I thought was the perfect IPA recipe 30 years ago now. Took me about 6 batches. The first batch, I took my stock IPA recipe. I made it. I made some notes on tweaks that I wanted to change. Then I brewed that, and I got pretty good with recipe formulation. I could envision a change I wanted to make and pretty well nail it on the next batch. But it took me about 5 batches, maybe 6 batches, making my IPA to where I called it the quintessential perfect American IPA. I hung my hat on that recipe and called it good. Left it in my brewer's log for decades and decades. Watched the IPA category, of course, blow up and become the heart and soul of the whole craft segment. But I was a little disillusioned at how big they'd become, how just aggressive, and it felt like the guys that wanted the hottest wings were the guys that wanted IPAs. They just wanted the most bitter thing that they could find. And like the guy with the hot wings and the sweat pouring off his forehead telling you these wings ain't hot, it got a little goofy to me. There's just like a race, an IBU race.
No, I
didn't think it was fair to do that to IPA. So I took my classic American IPA recipe and made a few batches of it, shared it around. People were really impressed that an IPA could be so palatable and approachable. And after a little time, I realized it was time to put forth a classic American IPA rather than what American IPAs have evolved into in all this time.
Gotcha. Interesting. Now,
it's got a little malt. It's got a little malt character, a little more malt character with some crystal malt, and we're at 60 BUs. And I use the 4 C's, the traditional 4 C's: American hops, Cascade, Centennial, Columbus, and Chinook. Those are the 4 C's, and those were what we American brewers back in the 80s and 90s put our hat on unless we were making European style beers, and then we went over to the nobles. But gotcha. Some of these crazy hops out, man, I can't palate them.
Yeah. One of the other things that I think is interesting, obviously, when people talk about Orlando, there's a very specific industry that people assume. And taking a look, it looks like you actually have a couple of exclusive beers, one that is for Universal's Water Park, Volcano Bay, and one that is for Raglan Road over at what was downtown, what is it, Disney Springs now, I think. Yep. I will start off by asking, it seems that the theme parks have jumped onto craft beer in a big, big way. Why do you think that is?
Well, craft beer is real and it's here, and theme parks want to offer you a better experience, and you can't do that with macro beers. There's so much exciting beer out there, and the trend to local is just undeniable. When people travel, that's generally the first thing they ask their barkeep is, what do you have local? And Disney and Universal were smart and paid attention to that. They've been a great partner. I make some goofy little beers. I told you I've got to make a 100-barrel batch, so I can't do a bunch of little one-offs like some of the smaller breweries can. But the way that I offset that is I take my wonderful beers and I will dose them with different extracts. Hopefully, I try to get as high a quality extract. So the grapefruit really has grapefruit in it. The cranberry really has cranberry in it.
Nice.
And I'll take and dose my OBP with some cranberry. Or at the Universal Studios, their official beer of the water park is Volcano Blossom. And it took me a second to remember the name, but it doesn't take me a second to remember that I put star fruit and papaya extract in that beer. So I take my little honey beer and I add a little fruity character to it. And that's the official beer of Volcano Bay now. And I take some grapefruit extract and I put it in my City Beautiful gag, but people love it, man. I got an email this morning about somebody that had it yesterday and found it wonderful. But I just put a little grapefruit extract in my City Beautiful just to kind of liven it up a little bit, and it sells really well at Raglan.
Nice. Now, the one thing that is interesting about Orange Blossom Pilsner is you do not have a tap room. You do not have a brewery. You, like you had mentioned, you're contracting out of BrewHub, who is absolutely fantastic. How difficult is it to build that brand name and brand awareness when you have no physical space for people to eventually gravitate towards?
Yeah, I'm a little afraid of retail, and retail's a big old monster. It would have been great to have a tap room. There was a time where I did trying to raise the money for a brewery, but man, people with money think their money's really, really important. And what I saw what they were getting for their money and what I was getting for my talent didn't seem to match up. As a matter of fact, I had one deal. We were ready to build a brewery, but he told me that I would only get a salary until he had 10 times his money back, and then I would get dividends, and I could be fired. They could fire me.
Interesting.
So that is pretty well why I never ended up with a physical brewery. It's just it never really worked out. But quite frankly, I'd like to have a little tasting room. I'd love to have an Orange Blossom Pilsner tasting room. But my idea for that is to find a restaurant partner that maybe has a tired concept that I could license that to, because just retail scares me. It just the thought of keeping servers working and not stealing from you and people kicking in the walls of your bathroom is just not something I don't think I have a whole lot of patience for.
No, I completely understand. So what is going to be next for Orange Blossom Pilsner? Where are you going from here? Do we have any new releases coming up?
Wow, no, we are just going to take it home with our good beer. Consumers love to have a new beer every time they walk into the pub. But boy, that's a pain on the whole infrastructure of beer. And it just doesn't. I mean, distributors hate it. Retailers hate it, and breweries hate it. And, in an effort to compete, they're trying to keep up with new beer, what you got new. And sorry, I just got the same awesome beer I've always had. We've got a lot of great beers that just because they're not new and fancy, we forget about them. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale suffered that a bit. What a wonderful beer. But, man, it was a decade since most craft enthusiasts had one. It wasn't fair. It didn't seem right. Always looking for the new, latest, greatest. I remember when I realized I had tasted everything that craft beer had to offer. And it's after I had been a beer hunter for quite a few years. In the last year or so, I really found nothing new or surprising, and it made me realize that I tasted most everything you could taste when it came to beer and craft beer. And once you have had it all, then you can pull back and really start dialing in what it is you truly love and like.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much. You keep making that good beer, and I cannot wait to get some more myself. Have a great day. Thank you for coming on the show.
Can I give a plug or two?
You can plug right away.
Fran Andrilovich down there has been the godfather of craft beer. And when I got the invitation to come on your show, I certainly said, Fran, you know this guy? Oh, he's rock solid. So
yeah, I was going to say Fran has been on the podcast. I had a couple episodes with him not too long ago.
And another thing I'd like to tell a lot of the new brewers and the beer enthusiasts is The Beer Hunter by Michael Jackson. He was all the journalists would drink beer after work, but write about wine. Nobody was writing about beer. So Michael Jackson became the first real beer journalist, and he's since passed away. Not the guy with the glove, of course, a British gentleman. But he has a series called The Beer Hunter, and it's available on YouTube. And I think there's about 9 or 10 episodes, and each episode is a region. One was California in the United States. One was the Czech Republic. one was Germany, one was the UK, and the roots of craft beer are in that series. And I urge every young enthusiast to look back at the history, look back at what we've done and what was behind them, to see the road that we've paved for you. You really need to understand our history, and there's no better way to see it than Michael Jackson's Beer Hunter series.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will definitely go check that out. I didn't realize it was on YouTube.
Yeah, please do. It's just a great resource, and it tells where we came from.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So there we go. We've got a great interview with Tom Moench. City Beautiful IPA, obviously named for Orlando's nickname, the City Beautiful. And if you look at the can, you'll actually see the, I guess, famous fountain in the middle of Lake Eola. And of course, OBP Squared, which is a fantastic beer. Both of those are available and absolutely fantastic. And if you want to learn a little bit more about them, we put City Beautiful IPA up on FloridaBeerBlog.com a couple years ago, so you'll be able to check that out. Very recently, OBP Squared was featured, so hopefully you've already seen that. If you haven't, definitely check them both out on the blog. We will also make sure that in the show notes, we've got a link to that carbonator that he sort of mentioned, so definitely check that out as well. In the meantime, next episode is episode 150. We've got a big and amazing guest lined up for it. And not only was the guest really good, but it ended up being a momentous day that we actually interviewed them. But you'll have to figure that out on the next episode. And if you want to know when the next episode is coming out, you should follow us. We're on social media, on Facebook. We are on Instagram, X, and Threads at Florida Beer Blog. We're on Facebook as FL Beer Blog because I don't know. We're on the internet at FloridaBeerBlog.com and FloridaBeerPodcast.com. Drop us an email at FloridaBeerBlog@gmail.com. Or you can subscribe to us on the podcasting app of your choice. And if you do subscribe to us, please make sure to like us and rate us and give us a nice big 5 stars so we can get the word out there. That would be greatly appreciated. We are also a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find information about them at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com so you can hear all the shows that are coming down about the great Sunshine State. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer and now brewer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer for the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. This is David Butler, your host and author. We will see you next week for episode 150. Yay! Thank you so much. Definitely go out and check out some good, tasty Orange Blossom Brewing Company beers. And that way you know that you will be drinking Florida craft. Bye, everyone.